ဒီနေ့ဟောပြောပွဲရဲ့ agenda ကိုဦးစွာပြပြလိုပါတယ်ရှင့်အခုပထမဆုံးဒါကတော့ကျမတို့မိတ်ဆက်ရင်းနဲ့အားလုံးကိုနှုတ်ဆက်ကြိုဆိုတဲ့အစဉ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးလို့ရှိရင်တော့ဒီကျမတို့ဒီဟောပြောပွဲရဲ့ဒီပညာရေးဟောပြောပွဲရဲ့ရည်ရွယ်ချက်ပေါ့နော်ရည်ရွယ်ချက်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့ဒီတက်ရောက်တဲ့ဆရာမတို့သုံးတဲ့ဒီ zone သုံးနိုင်တဲ့ပေါ့နော် zone function လေးတွေကိုကျမရှင်းပြပေးပါမယ်အဲ့တော့ဒီ function တွေရှင်းပြပြီးမှာတော့ဆရာမ Zoe Matthews ကနေဟောပြောတင်ပြမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆရာမရဲ့ဟောပြောပွဲအပြီးမှာတော့ကျမတို့ question and answer ပေါ့နော်အမေအဖြေကဏ္ဍပေါ့နော်ဆရာမတို့မေးတဲ့မေးခွန်းလေးတွေဆွေးနွေးချင်တာလေးတွေကိုပြည့်မောဆွေးနွေးမှုကဏ္ဍလာမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်နောက်ဆုံးအပြီးသတ်မှာတော့ကျမတို့နောက်ဆက်တွဲပေါ့နော်ဒီဟောပြောပွဲအပြီးနောက်ဆက်တွဲမှာကြားလိုတာတွေပြောပြပြီးတော့ဟောပြောပွဲပြီးဆုံးမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင့်အဲ့တော့ကျမအစီအစဉ်အရဒီဟောပြောပွဲနဲ့ပတ်သက်တာလေးတွေကိုဥစွာပြောကြားလိုပါတယ်ကျမတို့ UNESCO မြန်မာအနေနဲ့ဒီပညာရေးဟောပြောပွဲတွေပေါ့နော်ဒီပညာရဲ့နယ်ပယ်အစုံလင်းကဏ္ဍစုံလင်းအောင်ကျမတို့စီစဉ်ကျင်းပလျက်ရှိပါတယ်အခုဟောပြောပွဲကတော့ပရိပက္ခကိုထည့်သွင်းစဉ်းစားသောပညာရေးပေါ့နော်ဒီ CSE အလေးချက်များကိုစာသင်ခန်းတွင်မှာပေါင်းစပ်ထည့်သွင်းခြင်းဆိုတဲ့ဟောပြောပွဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဒီဟောပြောပွဲကိုကျင်းပရခြင်းရည်ရွယ်ချက်ကပေါ့နော်ဆရာမတို့ကိုဒီဖိတ်ကြားထားတဲ့ဟိုပေါ့နော်ဖိတ်ကြားစာမှာပါတဲ့အတိုင်းပဲဒီပရိပက္ခကိုစာသင်ခန်းအတွင်းထည့်သွင်းစဉ်းစားတဲ့အလေးချက်တွေဟာဆရာမတို့အတွက်ဘာကြောင့်အရေးကြီးရတယ်ဆိုတာကသိရှိနားလည်ဖို့ပေါ့နော်ဒီစာသင်ခန်းအတွင်းနေတာမကပဲကျမတို့ရဲ့လူမှုအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေမှာတကယ်အရေးကြီးတဲ့ values တွေဖြစ်တဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီ inclusion တို့အားလုံးအကျုံးဝင်ခြင်းနောက် equity တာတူညီမျှမှု peace ပေါ့နော်ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနောက်တရားမျှတမှုပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုစာသင်ခန်းအတွင်းကိုအပြင်မှာပါလက်တွေ့ကျင့်သုံးဖြစ်စီဖို့ကျမတို့ဒီငြိမ်းချမ်းရေး competency ပေါ့နော်ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးကိုဖော်ဆောင်မဲ့တက်ကြွမှုတွေကိုဖော်ဆောင်မှုအဲ့တော့ပညာရေးဆိုင်ရာချင်းကပ်နည်းတွေလည်းဟောပြောမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပြီးတော့ဒီကွဲပြားစုံလင်တဲ့ယဉ်ကျေးမှုတွေဒလိထုံးတန်းတွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုကျမတို့လက်ခံရှုမြင်တတ်ပြီးတော့အလေးထားတတ်စေဖို့ရည်ရွယ်ပြီးတော့ယခုဟောပြောပွဲကိုကျင်းပခြင်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒါဆိုရင်အခုဆရာမတို့မှာဒီဟောပြောပွဲကိုမြန်မာလိုနဲ့အင်္ဂလိပ်လိုနှစ်ဘာသာပေါ့နော်နှစ်ဘာသာကျင်းပနှစ်ဘာသာပြောသွားမှာဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ဆရာမတို့နှစ်သက်ရာဘာသာစကားနဲ့နားထောင်နိုင်ပါတယ်အခုမြင်နေရတဲ့ဆရာမတို့ရဲ့ Zoom screen ပေါ့နော်ဒီ Zoom screen ရဲ့အောက်ဖက်အလယ်နားလေးမှာလေကဘာလုံးပုံစံလေးရှိတယ်အဲ့ကဘာလုံးပုံစံမှာ interpretation function ဆိုတာပေါ့နော်သူကတော့အဲ့တော့အဲ့မျက်နှာပြင်မှာဆရာမတို့ကမြန်မာဘာသာစကားနဲ့နားထောင်ခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုရင်မြန်မာကိုရွေးပြီးတော့ English ဘာသာစကားဆိုရင် English ပေါ့နော်ဒါမှမဟုတ်လဲ original audio နဲ့လည်းတောက်လျှောက်နားထောင်သွားလို့ရပါတယ်ရှင်ဒါကတော့ဒါ Zoom ရဲ့ interpretation function ပါပေါ့နော်နောက် function တစ်ခုကတော့ဆရာမတို့မှာတကယ်လို့နားထောင်နေရင်တစ်လျှောက်လုံးမှာပေါ့နော်ဒီ presentation ကိုနားထောင်နေရင်တစ်လျှောက်လုံးမှာဖြစ်ဖြစ်ပြီးသွားတဲ့အချိန်မှာဖြစ်ဖြစ်မေးမြန်းလို့တာဆွေးနွေးချင်တာရှိရဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒီကျမတို့အဲ့ဒီ Zoom ရဲ့အောက်နားလေးမှာပေါ့နော်Q&A ဆိုတဲ့question mark လေးပြထားတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီနေရာလေးမှာQ&A box လေးရှိပါတယ်ဆရာမတို့နှစ်သက်ရာဘာသာစကားနဲ့ဝင်ပြီးတော့ရေးသားဆွေးနွေးမေးမြန်းနိုင်ပါတယ်မြန်မာလိုပဲဖြစ်ဖြစ် English လိုပဲဖြစ်ဖြစ်ပေါ့နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ဒါကတော့ဒါသိရမဲ့ဒီပေါ့နော် zone function လေးပေါ့နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အဲ့ဒီမှာလေးမေးခွန်းမေးချင်တယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ့်ရဲ့နာမည်ကိုမဖော်ပြဘဲနဲ့ anonymous အနေနဲ့မေးလို့ရပါတယ်ဒီမေးခွန်းတွေမှာပေါ့နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အဲ့တော့ဒါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့ဒီပေါ့နော်ဟောပြောပွဲကဒီဆွေးနွေးသွားမဲ့ဆွေးနွေးသွားမဲ့သူကတော့ဆရာမ Zoe Matthews ဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆရာမကိုမဖိတ်ခေါ်ခင်မှာဆရာမရဲ့ကိုရေးအချက်လက်ပေါ့နော် biography လေးတွေကိုကျွန်တော်အချင်းချုပ်ပြောပြလိုပါတယ်ဆရာမ Zoe ဒီ Art Resilient Consulting လုပ်ငန်းရဲ့တည်ထောင်သူ director တယောက်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ ARC အကြံပေးလုပ်ငန်းဟာဒီလူမှုအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေပေါ့နော်လူမှုအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေဒီတက်အသိပညာအတတ်ပညာကျွမ်းကျင်မှုတွေကိုပြိုးထောင်ပေးဖို့အလေးပေးပြီးတော့လိုအပ်ချက်တွေကိုလည်းဖြည့်ဆည်းပေးနေတဲ့ဖွံ့ဖြိုးမှုဆိုင်ရာစီမံခန့်ခွဲမှုအကြံပေးလုပ်ငန်းတစ်ခုဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆရာမဟာဆိုရင်အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းမှုတစ်ခုလုံးမှာအရေးသွေးပြည့်ဝတဲ့လူတိုင်းအကျုံးဝင်တဲ့ပညာရေးဖြစ်စီဖို့ပညာရေးကိုအားလုံးကလက်လှမ်းမီစီဖို့အတွက်ဥတည်ပြီးဆောင်ရွက်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အရင်ကတော့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာအခြေစိုက်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဆရာမရဲ့အဓိကကတော့သင်ကြားရေးလေ့ကျင့်ရေးသူတေသနနောက်ပြီးတော့ဒါသင်ကြားရေးဒီဇိုင်းပေါ့နော်ဒီလိုမျိုးရေးဆွဲတာတွေမှာနှစ်ပေါင်း20နီးပါအတွေ့အကြုံရှိရသူဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပြီးတော့ဒီ conflict ပေါ့နော်ဒီပဋိပက္ခတက်ရောက်မှုကိုခံရစေအခြေအနေဒီပဋိပက္ခဖြစ်ပွားပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာကြုံတွေ့ရတဲ့အခြေအနေနောက် ဖြစ်လာနိုင်တဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီဖြစ်ပေါ်ထွက်လာနိုင်တဲ့အခြေအနေတွေမှာဒီအခြေအနေနှိမ်ပါတဲ့အားနည်းချက်ရှိတဲ့ဒီလူအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေကပါပညာရေးမှာလက်လှမ်းမီပြီးပါဝင်သင်ယူခွင့်ရဖို့နည်းလမ်းတွေကိုလည်းရေးဆွဲခဲ့တာဒါ10နှစ်ကျော်အတွေ့အကြုံရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ဒီလူမှုရေးနိုင်ငံရေးစီးပွားရေးအသွင်ကူးပြောင်းမှုတွေမှာလည်းများစွာအထောက်ပံ့ဖြစ်စေတဲ့ပတ်ဝန်းကျင်တစ်ခုကိုတည်ဆောက်ဖို့ဒါစီမံကိန်းတွေမှာပါဝင်ဆောင်ရွက်နေပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဆီယမကဩစတြေးလျနိုင်ငံဝေါ်လန်ဂွန်တက္ကသိုလ်ကနေပြီးတော့ပညာရေးမဟာဘွဲ့ကိုရရှိထားတာလည်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒါဆိုရင်ဒီအကြောင်းအရာအဓိကအကြောင်းအရာဟောပြောပွဲကိုတင်ပြဖို့အတွက်ဆီယမအဆိုကိုဖိတ်ခေါ်လိုပါတယ် So may I cordially invite you to deliver a presentation on integrating CSE into classroom practice. Yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you, Lainwei. And thank you everyone for attending today. It's a real honor for me to be here today with you to share a bit of what I know about integrating CSE into classroom practice. I hope you come away feeling inspired and feeling maybe you actually know a few of these things already. And maybe actually you're doing some of these things already in your classroom to integrate CSE. So let's have a look at what we're going to be doing over today's webinar. So by the end of the webinar, and also you will have taken the e-learning course, you will have a better idea basically of what CSE is. So CSE short for conflict sensitive education. And of course, because it's education, that means, you know, teachers are a big part of that. Teachers are the implementers, but there's a whole big system behind them as well that is a part of this need to be conflict sensitive. We won't go into so much today about the education system. We'll just mostly focus on the classroom practice and what you can do. What are the main kind of principles behind what you're doing in the classroom and the reasons why the things that you do, you know, any little thing that you do will have an impact. So as you can tell, you know, peace is a big part of that. So conflict, peace, the two coins, the two opposite coins, two sides of a coin. We have education for peace, but also conflict sensitivity. So what's the connection between all of this and also what we do in the classroom? We're also going to be looking at how, you know, maybe some of the frameworks that we could use in order to guide our classroom practice. One of them being the 5 learning pillars. So another thing is, I think, which is a huge part of CSE generally and education for peace, is the reflection part. Not only do students need to reflect, but also teachers on a constant basis, on an ongoing basis. We all need to reflect on ourselves, on the way we do things, on our behaviors. But as teachers, of course, on how our activities are helping and how they are addressing conflict situations. So as with all subjects like this, like for example, civic education would be quite similar to education for peace. We are looking at developing our children, developing our students holistically. So we're not just thinking about, you know, helping them perform in their subject areas. We're thinking about developing them as people. So it basically, what does this? How do you teach your subject area at the same time as making sure that they are reaching their stage of moral development? I don't know if you are familiar with the Kohlberg's model of moral development. You may have come across it in a previous course. But at each stage that our children are in school, they need to be ethically, morally at a certain stage where they're able to interact with other people. So this is what we regard as the holistic, you know, you're addressing every single part of your student. And that also includes their culture, all of their different identities. So being culturally responsive. So how do we be culturally responsive? Excuse me. So with both of these components, I guess, of today's webinar, cultural responsiveness and CSE, Education for Peace, what kind of learning activities can we use? So we'll take you through probably a few of these. Hopefully we'll have time to take you through some activities that you can also use, and also hopefully be able to provide you with some resources that you can hopefully look up later. And you know, this will help you as well find a few more learning activities. All right. So as with all teaching, you have competencies like the Teacher Competency Standards Framework that you will be likely following at the moment in your own development. As part of that, you will also be developing CSE competencies, and your students will be developing peace competencies. So we'll be looking at what those are. Okay. So just a brief look at the guiding questions as a result of those objectives. So what is we're going to be looking at some example scenarios in the actual classroom. What is happening between the student and the teacher, and how, you know, what kinds of behaviors are these, and how are we going to be avoiding them? And as we just as I just mentioned as well, what is CSE, and what are the actual frameworks that we can use in order to integrate CSE into the classroom? So all of these questions basically are related to those objectives that I took you through just now. The teacher competencies, the peace competencies, what role everybody has to take in order to be to create an education or a system in your own area of the school in which you're responsible. So you're contributing, you're making sure that whatever you're doing is not actually going to be contributing to the larger conflict. Okay, so it's split into two parts. The first part will focus on CSE, and the second part will focus on being culturally responsive. Okay, if you have any questions, you can put those into the chat box. If it is something that we can talk about immediately, we'll talk about it. But there's also a Q&A session at the end, so I can address those at that point as well. All right. So let's get started. All right. So here we have, I know maybe the writing might be a little bit difficult to read, so I'll just read that out for you. We have a teacher, and he's looking at the illustration of a student, and it's a life skills class, and he's asked basically his students to draw a picture of a balanced meal. So what would be in a balanced meal? And the student has finished their work and shows him, and instead of, you know, being a responsible teacher, we'll go into what that is later. He says, "You think that meal is balanced? Go back to the mountain village where you came from, stupid." Okay, so a nice easy one for you to start with. What is the problem? Feel free to type into the chat. You can also just write it down in your notebook. It's really up to you. but I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it, write it down, reflect, and then we'll move on to the next one. What is the problem here? Okay. Yeah, we've got a couple of answers. Discrimination and judgment. Yeah, so what we have here is judgment giving by the teacher. The teacher is being judgmental of the student. And have a think to yourselves. If we are tasked with creating a safe environment, does this create a safe environment? Does this create a productive environment? Will the students continue to provide their energy, their efforts into their work if their teacher is this judgmental and discriminative? Mountain village. Yeah, maybe he knows that the student comes from somewhere quite remote and he's being discriminated that way. In any case, it's rude, obviously, and it's just definitely not a behavior to be pursuing as a teacher. So one of the key components, one of the key competencies that you're going to have to be focusing on is your self-awareness, making sure that you are the best person you can be in the classroom, because your students will be looking up to you. Look at the student in this picture. The student is looking up to the teacher, but the teacher is being horrible back. So put yourself in their shoes. How would that affect their learning process? So I think, okay, great. Thank you, Theory. So the teacher lacks the understanding of others. Yep, again, it's self-awareness, but it's also awareness of your own impact, the impacts of your actions on other people, your students in particular. And you also, that when we go back to that self-awareness, are we aware when we are talking, when we have a tone that we're using that helps, that kind of makes other people feel that they're being patronized? Are we being condescending in the way we speak? So it's a constant process of self-awareness. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so in this next image, we've got a group of boys on the one side, and we've got a group of girls on the other. And the teacher is conducting a little discussion. The teacher is asking the class which jobs women should have, and agrees with the student, a male student, that they should be only given jobs as nurses or secretaries or housewives, and that men can have any job they like. Again, have a think about it. What is the problem here? And what is the teacher doing to cause the problem as well, or inflame the problem? Okay, so we have a few answers here. Gender discrimination, of course it is. Gender inequality, stereotypes against girls and women. Thank you. So we have a teacher who is guiding students to think that this is actually acceptable, that his own opinion is obviously that women should only have the jobs of nurses, secretaries, housewives. And instead of actually making it a discussion point that and taking a neutral stance and encouraging students to challenge that idea, he is instead just guiding them, making sure that the students have the same kind of stereotype that he does. So again, it's about when you go back to your own self-awareness, I mean, is he self-aware? Does he realize that he is guiding the students to a problematic perspective? When you're teaching, you are it's important for you to realize that when you say something, you might actually be imposing your own biases in what you're saying. So instead of going into the classroom with your own opinion about something, the point is about increasing dialogue and increasing discussion and challenging, helping people challenge their own viewpoints, challenging your own viewpoints, in fact. And at the end of the day, as you see in the corner, if you are going into the classroom with your own mindset, with your own bias, and imposing that bias, you end up isolating, marginalizing other students. Okay, so in this case, the female students. You see the little cloud there above one of their students. So in this, I think we have a few more answers here. The teacher's attitude is the problem. The mindset is the problem. Absolutely. We need to be aware of that mindset, be aware of our biases, erase them before we go into the classroom, and instead engage the students in a discussion about it and make them understand why it is problematic. Get all of the students involved. At the moment, you see it is already segregated, the classroom. There's boys on one side, there's girls on the other, instead of it being actually mixed. So girls and boys on the same tables, for example. So it's physical. The environment is really important, making sure that your students are mixed, but also it's about encouraging a discussion that gets students challenging, gets students understanding that maybe maybe there is another idea. So what he could do is instead ask, okay, if he asked the male student, why is it not possible for women to take a different kind of job? He could pose more problem questions like this in order to get them thinking, well, actually, yeah, maybe he has a point. Maybe, I mean, women could be engineers as well. They could be architects. Yeah, that's a good point. So instead of agreeing, he should be questioning. He should be getting them to actually challenging them through his questions. All right, let's move on to the next one. In this scenario, we have a student who is on the autism spectrum, and he's very used to working on his own. He on a regular basis, this is the way he works, and the teacher is just not understanding that he has his needs. He doesn't want to work with a partner, and instead instead of understanding, the teacher actually tells him off for misbehaving. and there is no sort of empathy, there's no kind of effort for her on her part to actually compromise or understand where he's coming from, understand that he has his needs. So what kind of things do you think she could do? So in the Q&A, what sorry, in the chat, what kinds of things could she do in order to help the situation, in order to change the situation or mitigate? How do we help a student who is on the autism spectrum to feel more comfortable in this class, for example? So just a few seconds, add that into the chat if you can. I think someone was struggling there, but I think we're all good now. Couple more seconds. What can the teacher do instead? She's making him feel isolated. She's making him feel unwelcome. She's basically excluding him and not realizing this is actually part of his condition. This is part of who he is. He works on his own. He doesn't like to work in partnership. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, so we have, yes, inclusive activity. I guess that means basically being more inclusive herself, understanding that different students work in different ways. Myakain says she could get other students to help him and praise him for his work. And I haven't got the translation yet for the others. Perhaps have the student work solo and encourage him to listen in to the conversation of another partnership. Yeah, his comfort zone is working on his own. He's not intentionally misbehaving. It's just a part of who he is. So remember, being inclusive means understanding that everybody is different. Everybody we all have different abilities and disabilities. There might be things that are that we actually have to compromise with. We have to kind of go into the classroom thinking, okay, not everyone's going to react in the same way to what I have planned today. So to be dynamic, to be flexible, that's the kind of approach that we should have in being inclusive. And so that having the student working solo is not, it's not the end of the world. It's what he needs. So allow him to do it. And he can also listen in to the conversation with of other pairs of students. So another answer is help stable students to participate with other normalized. Well, let's not say normal. Let's say everybody is able in different ways. But maybe in what we can say is, something similar to the previous answer, which is, listening into the conversation, participating in their own way. They can feel like they're participating, even if they're working solo. So if we move on to the next one, she should practice little by little daily with a small task for each kind of student, for that kind of student, or just be aware, now she's had this incident in class. So in the future, tomorrow, she'll know that, okay, some tasks, some people will prefer to do things on their own. Okay, so some students will be working on their own, some people will be working in pairs. It's all about needs and preferences. We are open to to those needs and preferences. I think we'll have to move on quickly to the next one. Thank you, everyone else, for your contributions there. But we have a lot to get on with today. So let's move on to the next one. So student A and student B are having a fight. And you can see here that it's escalating. The conflict is escalating. Student A was making fun of student B and their cultural practices because they come from two different ethnic groups. So what is the problem and what could the teacher do? Just a couple of seconds here. Don't be shy. We can have a few answers. Mutual respect. This is one of the life skills that should be incorporated. Remember, we're focusing on holistic development, holistic moral development of our students. So as soon as a conflict begins, what we have to do is step in and intervene. But it's not just about intervening at the time of it. It's also about intervention beforehand, before the conflict actually begins, making sure that on a regular basis, on a daily basis, students are working together, practicing mutual respect. Kumu says respecting other cultures, being exposed to other cultures, and practicing cross-cultural communication, another student says. And just generally, what do we have here? Mutual understanding, sensitivity. All of these things would be on a daily basis. In order to prevent this kind of situation, you need to have them engaging in group work, group tasks, where they're working together. Regardless of their ethnic or religious backgrounds, they're all working together. They're kind of learning the skills of communication, of listening, of respecting other people's opinions. It's and before you know it, this kind of situation would be very unlikely to arise, because they've already created that kind of environment of diversity and acceptance and inclusiveness. So if you haven't actually created that environment, and this does actually happen, we have a few ideas here. Teacher can explain diversity as natural and share cultural knowledge. So get the students sharing cultural knowledge with each other. Yep. But again, remember, this is something that may not, if you're thinking about the heat of the moment, your students may not necessarily be listening at that point. So it's more about preventative, focusing on the preventative, making sure that you are constantly getting them to exchange cultural knowledge with each other, as you say, and explaining that everybody is different, and that's okay. It is fine for everybody to be different. So over the course of your semester, you're creating that culture of, okay, yeah, I'm fine with diversity. We have another idea, maybe refocus on what is happening in the classroom and let people cool down. Yeah, in the heat of the moment, it is very difficult, as you probably know from your own conflicts. It's very difficult to stop and to listen. So allow some time. Stop them from talking to each other, or just stop the situation from escalating any further, and then just get them to refocus back on what you're doing, the activities happening in the classroom. And then later on, they'll have time to cool down. And once they are cooled down, that's when you can have a conversation with them about what happened. They can reflect back. So that is, I think, if you think about your own conflicts, when has it been the case that you have been able to solve that conflict immediately when everybody's angry and at the height of the conflict? Have you actually been able to listen? Have you actually been able to pull yourself back and say, well, actually, hang on, maybe I shouldn't say that. In that way, empathize with your students. They won't be able to empathize with each other. You have to give them time to cool down first. All right, and just one last one: intervene and have separate meetings with the students and understand their situations. Yeah, and separate meetings as well later on with the students. That would also work. Just to go back to what I said earlier about self-reflection, this is a constant journey. CSE, peace education, is a constant journey for both teacher and student, and it should be a constant journey of reflection. If something bad happens, well, it's life, right? So this is what we have to, this is the reason why reflection is the most important tool for you as a teacher, to get students thinking about what happened and why it happened, and maybe how I could behave in the future that will stop that situation from happening again. All right. So we have 3 situations where we've had stereotyping between students, or the teacher actually stereotyping between groups, and prejudice between students, students kind of insulting each other because of their culture or religion. And then we've had discrimination of the teacher. The teacher doesn't approach the classroom inclusively, doesn't realize that each student has their own needs and may need some flexibility from on their part. Okay, so with that, what is conflict sensitive education? What is it that we are doing in the classroom? So if we think about all of those scenarios, how are we making sure that this stereotyping, discrimination, prejudice is not happening? How are we making sure that we have a peaceful, productive environment in our classrooms? So take a few more seconds, and I've got a little spidergram here. Maybe you can also sketch out a few ideas in your own spidergram of the components or features of CSE in the classroom. What is it that a teacher does? And what is actually happening? What are the processes that happen while we are addressing conflict sensitivity or conflicts in the classroom? And is it just inside the classroom? Is it also outside the classroom? Is it what is happening outside the classroom? Are we addressing that as well? We have a few ideas already in the chat. context awareness, mutual respect. Yep. What else would be a part of CSE? What would be the processes? What are the teachers doing and what are the students doing? All right, I'm just going to speed this along a little bit. So we have a few ideas here. Maybe some of these you've already been thinking about. So if we go back to what Nora Kim said about context awareness and mutual respect. So generally being, I guess, students being aware of what is happening around them. That's one. You're minimizing harm by giving them opportunities on a daily basis, as we mentioned before with the prejudice issue, when there was a conflict escalating between students of different cultures. A preventative activity or a preventative process is generally just to continuously take them through activities that are giving them a chance to work together, understand each other, and you know, cherish differences, not actually use differences against each other. So this is what we call minimizing harm. Our role is to use activities to give every opportunity we can for students to interact with each other, to engage in dialogue. And this in itself is minimizing harm. Our own, the way that we approach a classroom, if we approach it with a stereotype, with a bias, without checking ourselves and without self-awareness, we're not minimizing harm. We're actually promoting it. So it is minimizing harm both in the way we do things and in the way you are encouraging students to do things. So in this way, you're also promoting positive peace. And if you are aware of you know, conflicts and peace education or just generally peace building, there are two types of peace. There's negative peace and there's positive peace. Negative peace can collapse at any time because you haven't built the foundations of you know, people being able to interact with each other, to coexist peacefully, because they still kind of distrust each other. They still kind of, well, you know, that person's very different from me, so I think I'll be quiet for now, but you know, I still don't trust them. This is kind of a negative piece. But what you're doing by constantly in using interactive activities and getting getting students to do like activities where they share each other's cultures, they share aspects of their culture, they share aspects of themselves with each other, yeah, and cherishing diversity. That's the kind of opportunity that students will use and will receive in order to kind of become more accepting of diversity and build that trust. And that's what we call positive peace. And in that kind of positive peace, it's less likely that conflicts will happen in the future because we do, you know, we do trust each other. So trust is a big component here, and that is built through education systems, not just in the classroom. As I said, we're not going to be going so much into the education system today. We're going to be mostly focusing on what happens in the classroom. But there should be a system of inclusivity and equity, making sure that everybody has access to education as well behind what you do in the classroom. And there should be a system and a constant process of prevention, conflict resolution, and reconciling of the parties that are engaged in conflict. remember that the last point, remember that you are the primary point of reference. You are the person that the students look up to, that the students meet every single day. Whatever you do, if you promote an environment of stereotyping and discrimination, they're immediately going to do the same thing. It's it's very likely that this will be the case. It's natural, in fact. So if you are instead going into class and you're kind of creating this inclusive, peaceful, productive environment where you can listen to other people, you can accept that other people are different in the ways they do things, then there's a kind of cascading effect. Your students will also embrace that kind of culture and continue to be accepting and tolerant of each other. Okay. So what are the values? So we want them, remember, it's a holistic moral development of our students. So we want them to be respecting each other, as you mentioned earlier, some of you. We want them to be understanding. And I think you also said that caring is a part of caring about each other. That's also a part of CSE. But it's not just about those values where you're interacting with each other and you're listening to each other. It's also about taking responsibility. It's also, like if you're in that situation of conflict, maybe stepping up and talking to your friends, and saying, well, are you sure that was the right thing to do? Like you are responsible for making sure that other people are also understanding why diversity is actually a better choice, and inclusivity is a better choice than hatred. So that's part of the effort as well. You are working hard as a teacher, but also your students need to be aware that they should be working hard as well to on a constant basis interact and to coexist with other people. It's if you are in a relationship, for example, everybody, I think it's kind of a familiar case when you know that the other person is different from you. That means that you need to be compromising on a daily basis, and that is okay. That is fine, because everybody is different. So it's not just about being caring. It's not just about respecting. It's also about constantly making it an effort to be responsible, to be working together well with other people. Okay. So as I mentioned before, there's a few learning frameworks that we can use that can guide us on what kind of activities we can use. One of them is the 5 pillars of learning. So we're not just focusing on the subject area. We're like the learning to know. We're also focusing on, for example, the 21st century skills. We're focusing on the peace competencies. So how do we demonstrate those peace competencies? So learning to do. Learning to be is again related to the reflective that I mentioned earlier. Once you're in a constant process of reflection, you're becoming more self-aware, you're becoming more aware of how you interact with others, and then eventually you make that transition to becoming more of a respectful, aware, productive, compromising, all of those good things, all of the CSE values. You are learning to be that person with all of those values, and in the same way, you're learning to live together with other people and in the society that you live in. So think of activities that will be addressing all 5 pillars of learning whenever you do your lesson plans. Okay, so just a reflection, another reflection moment for you, because as I said, reflection is key. Can you list all of the specific skills students need in order to be able to resolve conflicts? So we touched on this a little bit earlier. What kind of skills did those students need, for example? What kind of skills do students need to resolve conflicts? Negotiation skills, open-mindedness. Yep, nice. Yes, definitely. Problem-solving skills, communication skills, wonderful. Critical thinking. Yep. Critical thinking, problem solving, hand in hand. Yeah, definitely. Respect for diversity. Yep. The ability to actually interact with others. Respect. Yep. Oh, self-regulation. I like that. Okay, so being able to hold yourself back or manage your emotions. If you get really angry, just helping yourself in your own way to manage that emotion, put it away for later, maybe go for a run or something, and then continue on with what you're doing. Okay, awesome. There's some brilliant ideas here. Team working, intercultural understanding, cooperation skills. You know it exactly. So you hopefully from this, I can see that you're already trying to integrate all of these skills into your classes, into your activities. So let's go deeper. Let's dive into the specific competencies and the specific things that you're going to get out of those learning activities. So as you mentioned, critical thinking, negotiation, and as I mentioned also earlier, self-awareness. This is probably one of the most important, both for the teacher and the student, competencies that you could have, because it affects everything else. Openness to otherness. So this is what we were talking about earlier about, when you have students doing learning activities where they're constantly working together and sharing their different cultures, sharing the different facets of themselves, their different identities, and feeling proud of who they are. When you're giving a constant opportunities for them to expose these themselves to others and work peacefully with others, this then builds that kind of openness to otherness. So it's just about increasing and making sure you're constantly including those opportunities. And then everything else comes in, falls into place. All of these other things: collaboration, teamwork, nurturing values, interpersonal, intercultural communication. All right. So we're going to practice a few of these activities, a few suggested activities. You may already be aware of this riddle, but this is just an example. So if I come up to you and I say, I show you this picture, and then I say, that man is my father's son. Then you look at the picture and you say, okay. Who is the person in the picture? I wonder. So what do you think? Who is the person in the picture? Somebody says his nephew. Yeah. Okay. That man's father is my father's son. So the guy is pointing to the picture and he's saying, that man is my father's son. So the other person says, in answer to the question, who is the person in the picture? Maybe his brother. Okay. Oh, himself, maybe.
And grandfather.
His brother. Okay. Lots of ideas here. Apparently the answer to the question, the answer to the riddle is his son. So it could be also his nephew. The person in the picture is his son. So the point of the activity, though, is that if I come up to you and I tell you a riddle, what are you doing? What are the actual skills? If we break it down, what are the actual skills that you are using in order to understand what I'm saying, first of all, and respond to what I'm saying, second of all? What are the skills that you're using? Maybe I'll give you a couple of seconds to throw your ideas into the chat. Yeah, listening. What is listening, though? Let's break it down further. Active listening. Okay, how do we listen actively? What are we doing when we're listening actively? Okay, we're analyzing what somebody is saying. Yep. So what they're saying comes into our ears. Then we think about what they're saying. Yes, active listening is definitely also paying full attention to the person who's speaking. Yep. Yes, the analyzing is the critical thinking, basically. We're trying to understand what the words mean. So I think that's what you mean by listening beyond words. You're not just hearing the words, you're trying to understand them as well. Also, yes, important, the emotions, you're trying to read the emotions of the speaker as well at the same time. Maybe what they're saying doesn't match with the way they're looking, for example, or with the tone of their voice. So, okay, listening with the heart. So I think maybe this is what you mean by listening with the heart, listening with empathy, listening to hear whether there is an emotion, a different emotion or emotion that you would expect while they are saying something. So yes, empathy, all of these things, it's amazing. Within a few seconds, while somebody is speaking, all of these things are happening. If we move on to the next activity, listening, active listening, that's one skill. We've got another activity, another learning activity that is possible. And that is thinking about our response to conflict. So one way of getting students to practice the peace competencies is by getting them to engage in active listening in different ways. This one is another one. This one is more about self-awareness. So have a little go. Which behaviors would you associate with aggressive or destructive? So, for example, focus on solving the problem instead of other people's behavior. Is this aggressive? Is it destructive? Or is it passive and destructive? Or is it constructive? There are 3 different ways of responding to conflict. So which do you think it is? Do you think that focusing on solving the problem is a good thing? Constructive means you're trying to solve the problem. You're trying to actively work with the problem. So which one do you think it is? Try to find a compromise or a win-win solution for all parties. Is that aggressive? Is it the fight response? Or is it passive? Is it the flight, like runaway response? Or is it the flow response, the constructive response, trying to solve problems? Okay. I think we have to move on again. So you may have had to go with a few of those options. But by the end of the activity, obviously you would give your students a lot longer, but because we don't have a great deal of time today, I'm just going to go straight to the answers. But you might give your students maybe half an hour for that activity to discuss in groups. Remember, these should be mixed groups, not of one particular identity. You're trying to cherish diversity. So we've got lots of mixed groups, mixed abilities as well, of students who are discussing how we respond to conflict. So in the groups, the students are discussing what kind of response each action is. So for example, fight, aggressive, destructive, maybe engaging in physical violence, so punching each other, kicking, maybe attacking each other verbally. These are all aggressive ways of responding to conflict. Interrupting the other person while you're arguing, retaliating, so attacking them back, and making threats. All of this is the fight. That's the fight response. That's the aggressive response. The passive response might be postponing this. So basically, the running away from conflict, postponing the discussion with other people that causes tension, like not engaging basically in difficult conversations, and telling the other person it doesn't matter, ignoring what's happening. So just basically pushing away your feelings and just kind of walking away. That's the flight. That's the passive response. The constructive, remember, this is about solution building, how people react to conflict. If they're constructive, then they might focus on solving the problem instead of solving the other person. They might focus on asking the other person about their perspectives. They may try to find compromises. So these are all constructive ways. These are all more likely ways of finding a resolution to conflict. So you got 3 different ways of responding to conflict. What about you? Take a moment, just think about how you do it. Okay, I think a few people have already had a reflection and thought about how they respond to conflict. I think for myself, I tend to go for more of the running away. So what about you? How do you respond to conflict? Are you aggressive? Are you passive? Or are you constructive? Ooh, somebody says a mix of the 3. That's great. Because remember, we can't be perfect all the time. But what is the ideal? Which one is the ideal? Fight, flight, or flow? What do you think? Yes, exactly, flow. So our learning activities and the way that we interact, the way that we ask questions and discuss with our students should be modeling that flow response, but also getting them in the practice of compromising, in the practice of listening to other people's perspectives. So all of these behaviors here in flow, in the flow column, we should be encouraging those in our learning activities and discussions. There's a question here. Do we need to know the time duration of the conflict while we're doing CSE? Ooh, Okay. I think maybe this is something we can also discuss at the end. But CSE is, remember, it's about responding, preventing the bad and promoting the good. But this is I think regardless of the duration of the conflict, you should be constantly throughout the semester working on, providing learning activities that do promote the good and do prevent the bad. So do promote all of those peace competencies all of the time. And it becomes, irrelevant how long the conflict is, because it's basically not an immediate solution to the conflict, but it is something that will promote that positive peace that I was talking about earlier and provide more stability in the future if you constantly work on it, if you constantly work on the self awareness aspect as well. Okay, I think I'll address the next one during Q&A. Let me just, if you don't mind, let me just finish the learning activities and then we can go back to your question later. So for this one comes from Marshall Rosenberg. It's called the MVC, the Nonviolent Communication Process. So I will take you through it just briefly as well. So the T, think about a situation where you had a fight with somebody. Think about what was said. Think about what they said to you. Think about what you said to them. So this is your trigger event. Write it down. You don't necessarily have to write it down at the moment, but just think about it. Your students will be writing it down. Give your students some time to think about this and reflect on that trigger event, that conflict situation. Then next, how did you feel during that conflict? What were you feeling about the other person? What were you feeling generally? Next, what did you need? So on the left-hand side, you write down your feeling. What were you feeling during that conflict? On the right-hand side, you're writing down what you needed. What did you need during that conflict that you were not getting? Okay, now flip it over. The next step that you're asking your students, and I'm asking you now, is to put yourself in the shoes of the other person in that conflict. How were they feeling during the conflict? Take some time. Think about it. What were they feeling? Not what you were feeling, what the other person was feeling. Write it down on the left-hand side. And then after that, again, you're putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. What did the other person need during that conflict? You have your own needs, but the other person has their needs too. What did that other person need? Okay. So at the end of this activity, what we do is we ask the students, okay, so now that you have taken the time to think about the conflict, do you feel about the conflict any differently? So I will ask you, do you feel, when you're thinking about this trigger event now and you're thinking about your feelings, your needs, and the other person's feelings and the other person's needs, do you feel any differently about the conflict? Do you feel maybe that you've cooled down a little bit, or do you feel like you're even angrier than you were before? Do you feel like maybe there were there was something that you could do that was different to what you had, to how you behaved in the conflict, during the conflict? Do you think you could have behaved differently? So think about it for yourself as well, in your own conflict. What does this activity give you time to do? What does it do? Why are we using this activity? Just wait a couple of seconds for some answers. Okay, yeah. So maybe you might be feeling more calm and less tense, and maybe feeling a bit more, maybe even feeling a bit more disappointed. Is that in yourself or in the other person? You might feel that you could have behaved differently. Yeah. So basically, it's giving you time. It's giving you time to reflect. And yes, exactly. It does help you to build a little bit of empathy as well, because you're putting yourself in the other person's shoes. You're not just thinking about what you need. So this is another activity that we could be taking our students through. Okay. So if you want to look at that up a little bit later, you can check out Marshall Rosenberg NVC on in your own time. Okay, so let's move into, I think we should probably move into the cultural responsiveness now, but just overall, what we want is a constant process of interaction over the course of the semester. It's not a quick fix, as I said. We have conflicts all the time. We're human. This is just the way we are, we all have different needs. And if we don't have empathy, if we don't have the ability to actively listen, we will constantly have that state of negative peace. What we're aiming for, what we're striving for as teachers, is to constantly use learning activities, regardless of what subject area you teach, for students to work together to create. You're creating opportunities in those learning activities for them to discuss, different viewpoints. Role plays, again, another type of activity that you could get them to engage in. And of course, that constant process of reflection, getting them to reflect after each of these learning activities on their own behavior, on the behavior of others, and mostly on how they acted and how they want to improve themselves in the future. Because the positive piece, the promotion of positive piece, is also the awareness, the growth mindset, the understanding that none of us are perfect. We are always, needing to improve in some way. So how can we? How can I improve? That constant process of reflection is so important. Okay. So moving on to the cultural responsiveness, bear those peace competencies in mind as well. So as we go through, think about those peace competencies that we're addressing as well. So essentially, in our culturally responsive classroom, or culturally responsive practice rather, we have three things. A teacher who is culturally responsive has high expectations of their students. Now, this is not in a bad way. This is, we expect a lot from our students. We want them to be able to work and produce and perform. We want them to be able to be successful. But we also want them to be able to work together peacefully and productively. So the second characteristic, a culturally responsive teacher is also culturally competent, and understands that there are differences between cultures, understands that there may also be, well, there may be prejudices and discrimination. There may be instances where there is conflict because of this, and their knowledge of cultural differences, but also knowledge of different cultures, allows them to plan different activities where students are able to share and cherish their diversity. If we go to the third characteristic, this is something that also comes from the academic, the theorist Paulo Freire, where we are able to bring ourselves down to the same level of the students. We're not, I think somebody mentioned earlier about using their power. I think it was when we were talking about the student on the autism spectrum. The teacher is using, is using their power in a negative way, in a destructive way, saying, oh no, you can't work by yourself. That's not the way I planned it. You have to work with somebody else. Well, this is a destructive way of using your role as a teacher, because just because you're a teacher doesn't mean that you can't really understand that that different people have their different needs. So bring yourself down to their level of the students. Engage in dialogue with the students. The students also need to be engaging in dialogues with each other. So your social relations, you're all on a kind of plateau, the same kind of level. You're sharing power with each other. Just because you're a teacher doesn't mean that you always dictate the way the class goes. You are the facilitator, you're guiding, and the students are also responsible for bringing knowledge, for challenging knowledge. Okay. So if we look at different scenarios, let's practice. Students design a set of classroom rules for each other in different languages. So what do you think? Is that having high expectations of your students, or is it having cultural competence, or is it being critically conscious, or encouraging critical consciousness? What do you think? Okay, we have a few ideas here. Okay, I think it's a toss-up so far between cultural competence and critical consciousness. And yeah, you would be right. So critical consciousness, you're giving the students a chance to actually set the classroom rules themselves for themselves. You're not the one imposing the classroom rules on the students. They want to be able to cooperate. They want to be able to communicate and listen to each other. So they're putting that in their classroom rules. Okay, so that's what we call critical consciousness. But I guess there is also an element of cultural competence, because you're understanding that you're putting them into groups, and you're understanding that there will be different perspectives depending on your culture, and they might actually talk about that in the discussion. Again, group work is an opportunity for these things, for students to be exposed to each other's differences. Okay, so role play, the next activity, talking about two students talking about their cultural similarities and differences. What do you think it is? What is the teacher using when creating and using this learning activity? Critical consciousness, cultural competence, or high expectations? One person says cultural competence, sorry. Yep, a few people are saying cultural competency. Yes, absolutely. Very good. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Students bring cultural items to class and present why they are important. So what is the teacher using in order to create a learning activity like this? Yeah, that's interesting. High expectation. You're having a high expectation of your students to be able to engage. You want your students to be able to engage. Excuse me. So you want them to be open to otherness and bring cultural items of their own, but also listen to others while they're talking about their own cultural items. So yeah, you do have high expectations as well while you're designing an activity like this. Cultural competence, obviously, definitely. And yeah, I think somebody, I think CC means critical consciousness, maybe. But it could actually be critical consciousness as well, because it's not you doing the talking, it's the students doing the talking. They're taking ownership and they are presenting to each other. You're just giving them the floor. You're just giving them the opportunity to do that. So sometimes we talk about student talking time and teacher talking time. Student talking time is we can also refer to that as critical consciousness, because you're allowing them the opportunity to share things. Okay. I'm just going to speed through. So students read about stories of conflict and stories of peaceful social interactions and identify the drivers of conflict as well as the values needed for peace. Okay, so this, what would that be? Critical consciousness, high expectations, cultural competence. Okay, remember, they're in a group. They're discussing between themselves. It's not the teacher that is imposing or directing the process. It's the students. Yeah, critical consciousness and possibly high expectations. Okay, I'm just going to skip to the cultural knowings framework because I think we're almost out of time now. So this is a super useful framework as well to be to use as a teacher. It comes from SIT Institute, and it guides the kinds of activities that you could use in your classroom. You basically need to address all 4 of the cultural knowings in order to have that process of constantly giving students opportunities throughout the semester, throughout the term, of building those peace competencies. So you need activities that will promote the knowing about other cultures. So that could be through readings, movies, recordings, audio recordings, sorry, and stories. You also need learning activities that will encourage the skills. So these could be the peace competencies as well, the role plays, the simulations, or field work. You need learning activities that allow students to think about why, reflect on why there are different assumptions about culture, why there are differences, why people do things the way they do. And then you also need to have activities that promote that essential piece, which is the self-awareness, the knowing oneself. So you're both promoting peace competencies and cultural knowing through activities that address all four of these on a constant basis. Remember, promoting positive peace, it is about building the foundations for our students to be working with each other, understanding each other, cherishing each other, but also building a culture of peace and cultural acceptance that actually goes beyond, it extends beyond the classroom, because they will go home and have those kind of skills and competencies, and then be creating little cultures, little pockets of acceptance and tolerance themselves in their own communities. They will take it out of the classroom and be constantly building that kind of positive peace. I know it's a lot. If I skip to the key takeaways, I know it's a lot to shoulder. I know it's a lot of responsibility for teachers to accept, but we are the primary point of reference. Remember that we are the primary point of reference for our students, and we are key contributors to positive peace if we practice CSE. Whatever we do in the classroom is then reflected outside of the classroom. If you are not addressing the development of your students holistically, the stages of moral development, for example, if you're not addressing the conflicts that happen, if you're just running away, if you're not kind of promoting the flow response to conflict, then it's easy for conflict outside of the classroom also to just escalate and become out of control, because they won't know, they're not armed with with the tools that they need to address conflict outside the classroom, not just in the classroom. So I think that's the key takeaway from today. You have a few more here specifically. I think if I just jump to the last one, students are cultural translators. They are the bridge builders, but also you as the teacher, you need to show them the way first. So that's what I mean by the responsibility that you have. And I hope that you have been able to take away a few ideas of activities that you could use and been inspired by today's session to be able to do that. Okay, so we'll leave it there. And we have a few questions in the Q&A to address. So if we look at this most recent one. Okay, can CSA frameworks be also used to train teachers to address practical challenges related to education in a conflict? Challenges such as not being able to have more stable classrooms, school buildings, being aware of potential attacks to schools. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, today's session was mostly focused on integrating CSE in the classroom. So the role of the teacher specifically in direct interaction with students. But this has a backdrop of a larger CSE integration. So hopefully you will have not just teachers being trained in CSE, but you also have principals, administrators, sorry, and also, you know, even education administrators at the highest levels being becoming more exposed and becoming more aware of the impacts of CSE and the impacts of equity or inequity in a system. So they need to be able to look at their systems. They need to be able to plan their the runnings of their school to be able to ensure that every student gets a chance to learn. Every student is being able to is able to have their needs addressed, whether they, you know, have different abilities or whether they come from families in remote villages. All of this needs to be addressed in the background by the administrators. The teachers do their own job in the classrooms. So that's what we were focusing on today. So in answer to your question, there does need to be training on CSE for all levels of people in the education system. So I believe we can provide some guidance on this after the webinar. So stay tuned for that. Okay, another one. How can we approach mitigating the students' hatred, which is rooted firmly on other ethnic groups due to past experience? Could you suggest examples of the classroom? Okay, so I have to reiterate that it's not a quick fix. Hatred comes from, as you said, as you rightly pointed out, it comes from that us and them narrative that students have grown up in. It comes from their family background. Even at home, they might have this narrative. Their families might already have this narrative. This is what you're up against, basically. It's rooted already firmly, as you so eloquently put there. It's rooted firmly in the communities. So how do we address this? I'm afraid you have to be patient because it is about using all of the learning activities that I've mentioned today, using those learning frameworks and consistently providing opportunities for students to be able to relate to each other, interact with each other, be aware of how peaceful classrooms actually equal productivity and success. So the more peaceful we are, the more successful we become because we're able to work together and like achieve more. There's strength in diversity. You know, you can't just tell people this. It has to be practiced over time. So hopefully you will be using those learning activities that we have covered today. Another one. Do you have a resource for creating role play engagements? This is an area where I'm not so strong and fear negative results. I need more knowledge about how to avoid pitfalls using role plays. So I think, I mean, we can share a few resources after this. But I think the key piece to your role plays is that self-reflection part. It's so important to have a self-reflection after each role play. So to reflect on what went well and what didn't go so well, why it didn't go so well, and what can we do in the future. In the same situation, what would I do? How would I behave differently to have a different outcome? So that kind of constant thinking about the different outcomes, the different possible outcomes, it builds critical thinking, but it also it guides the way to future behavior that might actually result in more desirable behaviors. So don't forget that's what I would say. Just don't forget that self-reflection piece afterwards. Whatever happens during the role play, even if it goes wrong, still reflect on how might you improve in the future? How might you achieve a better outcome in the future? Okay, another one. Can we use these frameworks to train teachers to teach very young students? Absolutely, because remember, I think another point of reference you should go to is Kohlberg's stages of moral development. At each age, we are building a kind of understanding of morals and ethics, how we can honestly and respectfully interact with each other. So have a look at that framework as well, and then think about activities, learning activities similar to the ones that we have looked at today, that will help them develop that kind of, all of the different peace competencies, the openness to others, the active listening, the mutual respect, whatever activities you can think of that might promote those peace competencies for your level of students or for your age level. Okay. Another one, is there any specific approach to solve conflict or hate among young students? So again, it's the same thing. You are constantly working on prevention rather than and ideally it's prevention rather than response. So making sure that they are constantly working on activities that help them understand themselves, but also understand each other. So not specifically, but as I mentioned just now, take a look at the stages of Kohlberg's stages of moral development, and then think about what activities you could use after that. Okay, I think the last question for today. I would like to ask one question. It was not a problem between teachers and students, but it was between the junior teacher and other seniors. The junior teacher was new in the school. She tried her best for her responsibilities, but senior teacher didn't do her responsibilities well. At first, junior accepted this, but later she couldn't bear it and refused. Senior. Okay, so basically there's a conflict between teachers, as I understand it. And a toxic environment that was created. Okay, so this is what I mean by it also has to be addressed at school level, at every level of education. Education administrators are also responsible for creating that culture of tolerance. And so this is an example of an environment where there is no culture of tolerance, where there is no culture of productivity or working together, teamwork. So I think it can be addressed when you are both training teachers and education administrators. Okay, I think we're kind of over time, right? So should I answer the last one? Is everyone okay with that? Okay. So given the context, ethnic and religious minority groups should be angry about the oppression, which might be labeled as hatred sometimes. Do you think such anger is justifiable? And how can teachers, especially ones representing dominant culture, address such grievances if they happen in their classrooms? I think if we go back to the what we were talking about, I think when we had the first, it was a conflict between students, and they had been there was prejudice. They were kind of making fun of each other because of their cultural differences. if we go back to the point of in the heat of the moment, nothing gets solved. You don't actually have that time to reflect. In this case, it's the same thing. I have to reiterate again, it is a process. It's a process that we have to be patient to be able to implement. We have to be able to patiently, consistently, constantly use learning activities that promote those peace competencies, whatever subject you teach, so that when we're kind of diffusing the anger, we're diffusing the hatred, we're constantly removing piece by piece that hatred. Reflection allows for this to happen. If you examine conflict carefully, it happens because you don't have time. You don't have time to think about what you're saying. You don't have time to think about what you're doing. You're just reacting. So give yourself time, give your students time to analyze these situations. They could be their own situations, or they could be, depending on the age of your students, they could be other conflicts around the world, could be other conflicts within your own communities. If it's too sensitive, don't use the conflicts within your own community. Use something else, like maybe a country in the region, or just go back to the personal level between parents and children, a conflict between parents and children, something that is not going to promote hatred anymore. Get them to analyze those situations. Analyzing, slowly reflecting, all of this is going to build by piece the foundations for people to become less angry. Remember the NVC from Marshall Rosenberg. You had time to reflect. So you had time to decide, oh, actually, maybe I could have done something differently. Or you've had time to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. So activities like that. All right, I think maybe I've talked for too long. So thank you so much, everybody. I really hope today has been helpful for you. And hopefully we can share a few resources as well after this session.
CSE လေ့ကျင့်များပေါင်းဆက်ထည့်သွင်းခြင်းအကြောင်းကိုတင်ပြဆွေးနွေးသွားပါတယ်ဆရာမအဆိုကြီးကိုအထူးပဲကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ပြီးတော့အသေးစိတ်ဆွေးနွေးသွားတဲ့အပြင်ကိုလက်တွေ့ကိုစာတွေကိုအချက်လက်တွေနဲ့ပေါင်းဆက်ပြီးတော့တင်ပြသွားပါတယ်ပြီးတော့မေးခွန်းတွေကိုလည်းတေချာတစ်ခုချင်းစီကိုaddress လုပ်ပြီးဖြေကြားပေးသွားတဲ့အတွက်ဆရာမကိုအထူးပဲကျေးဇူးတင်ရှိပါတယ်ပြီးတော့တက်ရောက်ကြတဲ့ဆရာမများကလည်းအထူးကိုတက်ကြွကြွနဲ့ပါဝင်ဖြေဆိုကြတဲ့ interactive လည်းဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့အပြန်အလှန်ပါဝင်ဆွေးနွေးဖြေကြားတော့အထူးကျေးဇူးတင်ရှိပါတယ်ရှင်အဲ့တော့အခုဒါဆိုရင်ဆရာမဆွေးနွေးသွားတဲ့အတိုင်းပေါ့နော်ဒီကျွန်တော်တို့ CSE ပေါ့ CSE နဲ့ဒီငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးကိုဖော်ဆောင်တဲ့ပညာရေးဆိုတာဟာစာသင်ခန်းတွင်းမှာဒါမကပဲကျမတို့ရဲ့စာသင်ခန်းပြင်ပလူမှုရက်ရွာလူထုအတွင်းလူမှုဖွဲ့စည်းအတွင်းမှာပါကျမတို့ conflict တွေဖြေရှင်းပေးနိုင်ဖို့နောက်အကြမ်းဖက်မှုတွေမဖြစ်လာအောင်ပေါ့နော်လူသားအချင်းချင်းကနေဒါမဖြစ်လာအောင်တားဆီးကာဝယ်ဖို့ပြီးတော့အချင်းချင်းကြားမှာလေးစားမှုနောက်မျှဝေစာနာမှုတွေတိုးပွားစေဖို့အစရှိတဲ့ဒီစံတန်ဖိုးတွေကိုဖွံ့ဖြိုးလာအောင်အများကြီးထောက်ကူပြုပါတယ်ဒီလိုမျိုးသင်ယူမှုကနေတစ်ဆင့်ပေါ့နော်ဒါကတော့ကျမတို့မိမိကနေစတင်ရမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ကျောင်းသားဆိုလဲကျောင်းသားရဲ့level ပေါ့နော်ဆရာမဆိုလဲဆရာမရဲ့အနေနဲ့မိမိကနေစတင်ရမှာဖြစ်ပြီးတော့မိမိတို့ရဲ့ဝင်းကျင်မိမိတို့ရဲ့လူမှုအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေမှာဒီ CSE အသိပညာကျွမ်းကျင်မှုသိမြင်နားလည်မှုတွေကိုဖြန့်ဝေမျှဝေခြင်းအပြင်အားလုံးမှာလဲမျှတပေါ့နော်တာတူညီမျှမှုရှိလာမယ်နောက်အဆင်ပြေပြေအချင်းချင်းပေါ့နော်ရှင်တွဲမတူကွဲပြားမှုတွေအကြားပေါ့ရှင်တွဲနေထိုင်မှုအထောက်ပံ့ပြုရင်းနဲ့ဒီဖြစ်လာတဲ့ဒီအစာသင်ခန်းတွင်အသေးစိတ်ကအစပေါ့နော်ဒီ conflict တွေကိုလည်းကင်တွယ်ဖြေရှင်းလာနိုင်မှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒီလိုမျိုးကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီမတူကွဲပြားမှုကွဲပြားစုံလင်မှုတွေများပြားတဲ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဆိုရင်ဒါယဉ်ကျေးမှုဒလီထုံတန်းတွေကိုထည့်သွင်းစဉ်းစားပြီးအားလုံးကိုလေးစားတန်ဖိုးထားပေးဖို့လည်းအရေးကြီးပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အဲ့တော့ ဒီ culturally responsive သင်ကြားနည်းကဒီလူမျိုးယဉ်ကျေးမှုဒီကွဲပြားခြားနားတဲ့အကြောင်းသားတွေကြားမှာဒါအဆင်ပြေပြေညီညီမျှမျှပေါ့နော်သင်ကြားပေးနိုင်မှုနည်းလမ်းပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီကျောင်းသားလေးတွေကပေါ့နော်ဒါယဉ်ကျေးမှုကိုပေါင်းကူးပေးကြတဲ့သူတွေဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့မိမိတို့ရဲ့ကျောင်းသားတွေအကြားမှာမျှဝေစာနာမှုကိုချင်းစာတရားရှင်သန်လာအောင်ဆရာမတို့ဒီနဲ့ပြောထောင်ပေးမယ်ဆိုရင်အဲ့လိုတန်းတူညီမျှပေါ့နော်အချင်းချင်းတာတူညီမျှမှုကိုလေးစားတန်ဖိုးထားပြီးတော့ဘယ်သူတဦးတယောက်ကမှဖယ်ချန်ထားခံရတယ်လို့မခံစားအောင်ပေါ့နော်အကြောင်းကအားလုံးကိုအကျုံးဝင်ပါဝင်အလေးထားမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့စာသင်ခန်းငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့လူမှုဝန်းကျင်ကိုဒါဆက်လက်တည်ဆောက်သွားနိုင်မှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ဒါဆိုရင်ဆရာမတို့ရဲ့မေးမြန်းထားတဲ့မေးခွန်းလေးတွေကိုလည်းဆရာမဇိုကြီးကနေဖြေကြားထားပြီးပါပြီပေါ့နော်တကယ်လို့ဆက်လက်မေးမြန်းတင်ပြလိုတာဆွေးနွေးလိုတာရှိလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီပို့တဲ့ email ကိုပေါ့နော်စာရေးသားပြီးတော့ပေးပို့နိုင်ပါတယ်ကဲအဲ့တော့ဒီပေါ့နော်ဒီဒါအပြင်ပေါ့ဒီအချက်လက်တွေပြင်ဒီဆရာမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့ဒီယဉ်ကျေးမှုကိုထည့်သွင်းစဉ်းစားပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဘတ်စုံလွှမ်းခြုံလေ့လာတတ်တဲ့အမြင်ကိုစောက်ပြီးနိုင်ဖို့အရည်ရွယ်ချက်နဲ့လည်းတင်ပြဆွေးနွေးသွားပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဆရာမတို့ရဲ့မျှော်မှန်းထားချက်တွေကိုရရှိမယ်လို့လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ယူဆပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီကနေရရှိသွားတဲ့အသိပညာဗဟုသုတတွေအပေါ်မှာလက်တွေ့ကျွမ်းကျင်မှုတိစောက်ပြီးစာသင်ခန်းထဲမှာလည်းလက်တွေ့ပေါင်းဆက်အသုံးချနိုင်မယ်လို့လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့မျှော်လင့်ပါတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အဲ့တော့ဒီဟောပြောပွဲရဲ့PowerPoint တွေကိုဆရာမတို့ရဲ့ email တွေစီပို့ပေးပါမယ်ပေါ့နော်နောက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ chat box မှာလည်းwebinar survey အတွက်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ webinar survey အတွက် link share ထားပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီ link ကနေပြီးတော့ဝင်ပြီးတော့ဒီ survey ပေါ့နော်ဆရာမတို့ရဲ့ဒီအတွေ့အကြုံကို survey ကောက်ယူတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒါကလည်းနောက်ပိုင်းကျမတို့ဆက်လက်ကျင်းပမယ်ဒီပညာရေးဟောပြောပွဲတွေမှာဘယ်လိုပုံမကောင်းမွန်အောင်တိုးတက်အောင်လုပ်ရမလဲပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်အကြံဉာဏ်လဲရယူခြင်းလို့ပေါ့နော်ဒီ survey ကိုပြုလုပ်ရတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အချိန်ပေးပြီးတက်ရောက်ကြတဲ့ဆရာမများအားလုံးကိုလည်းအထူးကျေးဇူးတင်ရှိပါတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့webinar နဲ့မဆိုင်ပေမဲ့လည်းဒီကာလကနိုင်ငံတော်ဝန်ပေါ့နော်အထူးရည်ကြီးရေရှမ်းမှုတွေလည်းဖြစ်နေတာမို့လို့ဆရာမတို့အားလုံးလည်းနေရဲကနေအထူးသတိရှိပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်ဒီခိုင်မာတဲ့သတင်း source တွေကနေတကယ်လိုအပ်တဲ့ဟိုရဲ့အရေးကြီးတို့စေဝါတို့အသုံးဆောင်တို့အဲ့လိုမျိုးအထူးပြင်လိုအပ်တဲ့နေရာတွေမှာလည်းပြင်ဆင်ထားကြဖို့လည်းသတိပေးအပ်ပါတယ်ရှင်ပေးကင်းကြဖို့လည်းဆုတောင်းပါတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့နောက် webinar များကိုလည်းဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့တက်ရောက်ကြစီချင်ပါတယ်ကျမတို့ webinar ရှိရင် Facebook invitation စသဖြင့်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုမျိုးဖိတ်ကြားပါမယ်ရှင်ဆရာမများအားလုံးကိုစိတ်နှပြကျန်းမာချမ်းသာကြပါစေမင်္ဂလာရှိတဲ့နေ့လေးဖြစ်ပါစေရှင်အားလုံးကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်
Thank you, everyone.